connecting to the internet.
Internet.
Networking software.
World Wide Web thing on a computer today.
Computer.
NetSurfer Pro.
Hello and welcome to NetSurfer Pro, a whirlwind ride through the World Wide Web. I am, of course, your co-host, Galen.
And I am your host, Matthew Marisa. Though this one's going to be a bit more loose, it's like not a talk surfer show because it's one topic, but it is less structured and less about like deep analytical conversation than our normal NetSurfer pros.
Yeah, this is more along the lines of a first impression, although it's a first impression of something that we both sunk a number of hours into
a
at
net
this point.
streamer of consciousness.
Yeah.
Maybe?
Yep. Yeah, that's good. That'll go on a t-shirt very well, I think.
Net streamer of consciousness.
So I want to introduce this, not just with the topic that we're going to be talking about, but kind of an associated topic. Because today we are talking, we're doing a part 2 in a sense.
Sort of. It's sort of a follow-up in a way.
Yeah. We have previously discussed our love of the Sid Meier's Civilization series, especially in the episode that we did over Sid Meier's Civilization 6.
Yes.
And in that episode, I also know that we talk about our wishes for Civ 7.
Right. This was like right around when Civ 7 was first being teased.
Yeah.
Not quite hard announced, but sort of soft announced. And I think that's when a lot of discussion about what Civ 7 could be like came up.
Yeah. And I wanted to talk about the way we talk about things. Not we specifically, but the way that we, in general, on the internet criticize things is bad, and this is a known factor.
My fellow internet critics.
Yeah. So, okay. If you were to ask me, an unqualified rube, what the core cause of a lot of internet stuff, let's just say, is, it would be that there was a period on the internet where being angry about video games was very, very funny. There is still that, we're still essentially in that period. Being angry at video games is kind of generally a very easy shorthand to be funny. However, I feel like the era of perturbed video game gentlemen, if you will, the era of what were the devs thinking, sort of poisoned a lot of discussion around video games. A lot of people who do not consider themselves video game critics, but are still essentially video game critics, dictated the tone with which we talk about video games for the next 24 years. And, again, this is a little bit of beating a dead horse. This is a little bit of a known factor, but I think it is worth putting a fine point on it. People on the internet don't talk about video games with the assumption that they will ever meet the developers of those video games. And I think that that's something that you have to do, even if you're going to be a YouTube internet upset man at video games. Or even just if you are going to be critical of video games in any way, you have to understand that you might meet the developer. Now, what I am saying there is not inherently that you have to be nice to the developers every time. There are individual people who are shitheads. There are Peter Molyneux's. There are David Cage's. There are Grums's. I
don't even know if he counts as a game developer now.
Yeah, he's done less developing of a game and more talking about other video games. There are individual people who are shitty, who don't deserve your respect, and treating them without respect is a very powerful tool. But treating people without respect is also the modus operandi of the entire internet.
No, you're treating very powerful tools without respect.
Hey, nice.
I think there are a lot of elements in sort of basic gamer discourse to keep in mind. I think one thing is a lot of people, I don't want to say are selfish because that sounds rude, but they tend to frame things in terms of how does it impact exclusively me?
Self-interested.
Self-interested, yes.
Yeah.
And you'll see this a lot when it comes to this DLC I cannot afford, therefore it is an attack on me. Or this game is doing something I dislike, that is an attack on me.
Yeah.
This game has minorities. In a lot of cases, people who don't like quote-unquote DEI are just people who aren't caring about people who aren't themselves.
Yeah.
The idea, the ability to put yourself in other people's shoes or to accept that there are decisions made that aren't for you as an individual is kind of difficult because it kind of goes against your own ego at times.
There's a very good quote, and I say very good as in I heavily dislike this quote, but it's sort of a foundational quote in my mind. I believe it was the creative director of Grand Theft Auto, somebody who has since left, somebody who was kind of a dingus, let's say. Not going to give him full shithead treatment, but he had a quote of it's like video games are made by elves. I think you lose something when you learn how video games are made. That's a bad way of looking about video games, but I do think it is the standard way that a lot of gamers look at video games is video games are a thing that is made via magic, and the developers who have to slave away for 70 hours every day to make them are sort of a secondary concern.
But also then you have things where once they have one name to put to something, they will extensively attack it.
That's
I will say, it's funny to make fun of Todd Howard.
Yeah.
He is at the head of a huge video game company, but also I recognize that he doesn't make every single decision behind, Starfield, for example.
Yeah.
Same thing with Tetsuya Nomura. People love ragging on Tetsuya Nomura, and as much as I do enjoy a good Genius no Bunga joke, I also recognize that there are so many aspects of those games that he doesn't really have the final say in or is delegating to other people.
Yeah.
My favorite game of all time, The World Ends With You, is only designed, it has character designs by Tetsuya Nomura, but he didn't even do all of them. And learning that there's all these other people involved, for me, I think made it more valuable because I got to understand the variety of perspectives and the amount of collaboration it took to make one of my favorite games.
Yeah.
I think also, though, playing off of the Magic Elves thing, people do a weird thing of, is it Hanlon's razor? I am definitely the first to assume stupidity over malice.
Yeah.
But people also assume incompetence over malice when the incompetence is often misplaced. This is when you hear people say lazy devs.
Yeah.
I think oftentimes it is a much more complicated issue, and gamers are only able to perceive the end subject or the end piece and then have to imagine what happened. And, you get things oh, the dev was lazy and is doing it for money when maybe they had a tight deadline they had to make. And setting the deadline's difficult because all their marketing was for this and they have a Steam sale for this. And
a big common failure, if I can hone it to a single razor point, a significant failure of the average internet gamer in understanding how games are made is assigning blame to developers when publishers are significantly more likely than not the ones who have added the unpopular parts of the game.
Or at the very least, publishers have created environments where the unpopular parts had to be done.
Yeah.
In the case with Civ, I think especially, as we'll get to as we go through the episode.
Yeah. I all of this sort of all of this preamble is kind of to say that we are, I don't think it's going to be unfair of us to say, going to be very critical of Civ 7 for a lot of reasons. And one of the reasons I actually wanted to bring this up is that a number of the things we discussed in Civ 6, I'm not going to sit here and say we are the reason that these were added, of course, but I do think the developers are listening to the community is what I'll say.
Okay, look, we have had, in the past 4 or 5 months, this isn't enough to make changes to the game, I recognize. In the past 4 or 5 months, we've had a significant uptick in listens to our Civ 6 episode. I think that just means people anticipating Civ 7's release are listening to Civ 6 content, and we are a podcast that discussed it. I do think it would be really funny if someone at Firaxis had their ear to us like a fucking NSA spy.
Yeah.
Oh my god, they just... Because, we'll talk about this in a bit, I think. This is all still part of the intro, but it is shocking how accurate we got, or how close things were. And I do think, like you said, they're listening to the community. They are listening to the community for a lot of things. The community's ability to convey their problems is difficult, but that's how it is with everything. Especially once you get a mouthpiece that is responding to you.
Yeah.
I think you see this with Mark Rosewater from Magic. Mark Rosewater is a designer. He is not a developer, which is a different division of Wizards of the Coast. And he is not a marketer. He is not one of the people at Hasbro that are doing these licensing deals. But he has to get all the brunt of the flaming and the anger and stuff like that because he is the public figure that they can send a message to on Tumblr and he responds to messages on Tumblr. And having that figure doesn't always help these companies. It often just means one person has to have the thickest hide possible that they could tank 50 shots from like a DPS.
Yeah.
This is like, Monster Hunter just came out. This is like the high-end gear you get is from their hide because their skin is so thick because they're the internet punching bag. I don't know how Mark Rosewater does it, honestly. The man is sitting here being like, what would be a really cool card to add to Magic the Gathering? I've got an idea. What if we made a card that was my driveway? And then he makes an idea, ships it to design. They're like, he made what? And then people on the internet are like, Mark, why is there Spider-Man, Mark? And he can't just say, because it's money.
Yeah.
Anyways, I've gone off track, I think. What I'm trying to say is it's very easy to get caught up in a lot of emotions when discussing games online, which feels really bad.
Yeah. There are times to be emotional with video games. There are times to be highly critical of video games and of developers. I don't think this is one of those times. I do think it is an acceptable practice to be highly critical of the product, of the game that exists. But I want to couch this at the beginning of like, any developers listening at Firaxis, we do not hate you. I think to sum up everything that I've said, Firaxis, we're on to you. We know that you're not actually a studio with like 50 people. We know it's just Sid Meier. And so we're going to be directing any and all hate to Sid Meier himself.
Firaxis, if you want to come on and talk about the game Tapestry, that would be great.
That'd be real cool.
Yeah. You said like you got to criticize as if you were talking to the developer or as if you'll meet the developer. That's why we send out all these invitations. We've gotten nothing in response. Nobody's called back.
And Sid Meier, if you want to come on and talk about Will Wright for a couple hours, that'd be really good.
Sid Meier discusses The Sims.
Yeah. So, hey,
okay,
it's 15 minutes into the episode or so. Let's talk about the topic. We've already mentioned it, of course, but the topic that has been on both of our lips and our minds and our butts.
And it hasn't been on my... What have you been doing?
What, that's not how you play Civ 7?
No.
Oh. Well, there wasn't a tutorial, so I didn't know.
I see. Yeah, so, okay.
Okay.
Let's go to the fact corner really quick.
Yes.
I think that'll be a good reset.
The Fact Corner.
So, Civilization 7, spelt Civilization VII, because they're Roman, because it's history, is a 4X strategy game in the Civilization series. It's the 7th of the main line, though there've been a ton of spin-offs. We talked about the 6th one. Civ 7 released in February of 2025 with like a brief pre-release window for higher Founder Pass package purchases, which is very standard.
Yeah, it's a standard practice at this point of like, if you buy it, pre-order it a couple weeks early and we'll give you access, 7 days before.
Yeah. As I said before, making games nowadays requires almost ongoing development, or at least gamers expect it. If you stop developing your game, it is dead, especially a multiplayer game.
Yeah.
And because of that, like, you need to fund the ongoing development. And at some point, you can't sell more games. So I have a lot of opinions about things, but, like, I don't want to be all DLC bad. Because I think it is a more nuanced discussion that involves more context than that. Either way, back to the facts, though.
Yeah, so when you say 4X is a specific style of strategy genre. Mm-hmm. The 4X stands for explore, expand, exploit, and exterminate.
Yep.
Which essentially boils down to the idea of being in charge of some kind of nation, civilization, what have you, faction, and attempting to continually expand your borders, exploit whatever natural resources are within your borders, exterminate other players or wildlife or what have you, and whatever the other X was.
They really don't exterminate wildlife.
Yeah, it definitely depends. I know that the Warhammer 40k 4X game has like roaming baddies that you can take down, for example.
Yeah.
It depends on how much combat focus there really is.
Yeah.
But
so 4X games, before you ask, isn't that a little colonialist?
Yeah.
Let's move on. No, this is sort of a broader conversation about games and how games are often built around conflict. And one of the biggest conflicts in the history of humans is war. or also colonialism, fighting for land or, killing people who are already there so you can take your land. And the fact that that is a like negative thing that has a lot of consequences and those aren't presented in these games, you kind of get used to it after a while. It's hard to play these games as a purely historic simulation because not only are there things like Abraham Lincoln being the god emperor of, I don't know, China.
Yeah.
And that these world leaders are alive for millennia. And there's also the fact that being a game where a player controls an entire civilization, it's kind of inherently sort of monarchist or dictator.
Yeah, there's
dictatorial.
Like, yeah, it's the kind of thing where there is a significant amount of nuance and discussion to be had. And
but
like
also there's a lot of kind of brushing aside because it's kind of what the game is.
Yeah, there's literally there is literally an expansion for Civ 4 that was called Civ 4 Colonization that was explicitly about like going to the New World and, trying to become like an America or a Dutch colony. This is something that is baked into the foundation of the 4X genre, and it is something that the games themselves kind of have to grapple with on an individual basis. Civ 7, we'll get into whether or not it does a good job, but
at a basic level, what you do is you choose a world leader, a civilization, and a number of mementos, which are essentially small perks or buffs that will apply through the game. You choose what era you want to start in. Currently, there are 3 eras: Antiquity, Exploration, and Modern. And then you play through the game, trying to compete with other civilizations. You expand your civilization by founding new towns and cities. You build buildings there to generate resources such as science or income, production, food, such. You also build world wonders from throughout history, and things that aren't really world wonders but kind of count. World wonder in historical strategy games is a very loose term.
Yeah.
See also 7 Wonders expansions, which has more than the 7 Wonders.
Yeah.
They were like, Petra's not a 7 Wonder of the ancient world, but it is cool. So in Civilization, you're doing this all on a hex grid. It used to be a square grid, but they changed it to hexes because hexes are cool.
Hexes or bextas?
Yeah, depending on the game. You do this over the course of a number of turns. Every player kind of takes turns simultaneously. A turn is then more of like a day, where you can think of it like at the start of each turn, you get all your resources, and then you spend them however you wish. You move units, but then the units have to take a break before the next turn.
Yeah, I believe that it only changes when war is in effect, when like a player is actively fighting another player, and thus turns would matter a lot more. At least I know that is how Civ 6 did it, where it was essentially real time for just the turn until everybody was finished, and then if a war happened, then it went to turn-based for the people in the war.
So you might be wondering, how do you win? Well, there are 4 main win conditions, which have they call them legacy paths. It's like a set of objectives you have to complete in order to get the win condition for that path. There are new ones for each era, and that's because you could play an entire game in the Antiquity era and end at the end of the Antiquity era. You could play just the Modern era and end at the end of that. Most games will start in Antiquity and end in Modern era, that you can adjust the time however you wish. The settings for Civilization games tend to be very open to sort of customizing how you want to play, such as like removing threats or adding more threats, changing difficulty settings, and so on, changing map generation. Yeah. The main legacy paths are military, culture, science, and economy. Military is generally removing, killing people.
Like it is either removing people or founding more cities more often than not. It's having a certain amount of cities.
Yeah, but capturing cities makes it easier to get the points needed.
It is the focus still.
And then as you go in the modern age, the military win con is to build nukes.
Which is very fun, actually.
Yeah, you reach the apex of power.
Yeah, the Manhattan Project in the modern era being the way that you complete a domination victory is very fun, very cromulent.
You can still kill everyone, because if a player's capital is taken,
then the player
is knocked out.
Yeah.
And so, like, if you run out of your capital, then you're out. So if everybody's capital is taken except the one person, they're the last one standing.
Yeah.
Science is kind of complicated because in the Antiquity age, it is about getting codices, which are books. They give you science per turn. In the modern age, it's about having high tile yields. Or no, sorry. Exploration is high tile yields. Modern Age is the first manned space flight,
Yeah.
which is pretty standard for Civ. Usually it's the space race is what is being represented by the scientific win condition.
Yeah.
Culture in Antiquity is build 7 wonders.
Yep.
There's more than 7 wonders available in Antiquity. In Exploration, it is to get relics, which you get by spreading your religion to other civilizations. And then in the modern era, it's to get artifacts, which you get by excavating spots that are like dig sites. And then you have to build the World's Fair after doing so.
Yeah.
And we'll get into the nitty gritty of this as we discuss things like changes or our takes on the game, I guess.
Yeah.
And then economy, for Antiquity, it is to have a bunch of resources in your city or in your civilization. You have to slot them in, which is a mechanic.
Yep. And primarily one of the main ways you're going to be doing it is also, if you're not founding cities or getting resources yourself, you are starting trade routes with other... I said that very strangely.
Yeah, you couldn't decide on routes or routes, so you went in the middle.
Trade routes. You make a bunch of trade rats with every other civilization, or the ones that are near you, to get access to their resources and slot them into your cities.
Yeah. And then in the Exploration Age, it is to get treasure fleets, which they spawn on distant lands, which are continents that are not your own.
Yeah, we'll get into that.
And you have to have a settlement there, you have to work the resource, and you have to have a fishing quay to spawn a treasure fleet, which you then bring back to your mainland continent cities to deposit the treasure fleet. If that sounds confusing, wait till you hear the modern age. You have to have factory resources slotted into your factories in order to get factory points. You get 1 for each factory resource, but each factory can only produce 1 type of resource, even if you have multiple resources in your inventory of resources. To build a factory, it needs to be connected by rail station and or port to your capital.
Yep.
If it's on the same continent as your capital, it's just rail stations. In railways, something can be connected by railway, or something can have a rail station but not be connected by railway to your capital.
Yeah, right.
And if it's not on the continent, then it has to be connected to a port that has a rail station in the same city. Make sense? Cool.
Good. The final section is that after you do all of that, you are building the World Bank by taking basically a unique unit, bringing him to all of the capitals in the world, clicking his thing of set up the World Bank in this capital. And then once you do that for all the capitals, that is you winning by creating the World Bank.
Yes.
So, we've already gone over it. Let's get a little more specific with some of the changes that are present.
Yes.
So, okay, one of the biggest ones, the eras, the ages. In previous Civ games, ages were more of a denominator of how far along the science tree you were on. Or, I don't know if the culture tree impacted it in Civ 6. I believe it was mostly just in Civ 6 it was a timer-based thing that was mostly based on how long it would take an average player to get through a bunch of the science tree in one age.
I'm pretty sure science progress does affect that timer, though.
It does. I want to say that the timer moved up if somebody continually got techs in the future.
Yeah.
So, in Civ 5, the tree was entirely delineated by just these are the ancient era techs, these are the Renaissance techs, etc. The changing of ages it's basically a NASCAR. There's a NASCArization of Civ 7 where people only ever watch the first and last lap of NASCAR. So what if we had a bunch of first and last laps of NASCAR? It's kind of a similar thing of it's very easy to get burnt out in Civ because you have a really shitty start. So what if there were just 3 games of Civ per game of Civ?
So, yeah, essentially the eras or the ages are much more separated. They have distinct start and end times. What happens is all those legacy paths I mentioned, when any player completes one, it goes to a global era progress tracker. And once that reaches 100%, the era ends on the next turn.
Yeah.
And also completing the science in civic trees can also add era progress.
Yeah.
So as people just progress those win conditions, if it's not going to end with that era and end with that as a victory, then it just progresses to the next era quicker. And you get bonuses for completing those legacy paths. They're called legacy paths because they give you legacy points, which give you starting bonuses in the next era.
Yeah.
What ends up happening is all your cities except 1 or 2, I guess, reset into towns. We'll explain that in a second. Also, like, most of your buildings lose their inherent bonuses.
Yeah, they get a significantly lesser bonuses that is based on what they were in the previous era, but like the idea is that a lot of the stuff that you have built in the previous era needs to be upgraded in some way.
Yeah.
You built a brickyard in the antiquity era, but in the exploration era you need to build a sawmill, that sort of thing.
Those are both antiquity, and also they're ageless, which means they can't be built over.
Right. What's the shit? What's the...
So, like, you have a market in the early age, and that goes from, like, this open-air market to, like...
A bazaar, I think, is the...
I thought bazaar was a specific thing. Maybe it is the exploration era one is a bazaar. Because the modern era is just like a shopping mall.
Yeah, it's like there's a department store for happiness and a stock market for gold, which is very fun. One of my favorite little bits of like, a bit that made me laugh because it made sense from a gameplay decision, but was very funny to think about in a new ludonarrative sense, was I was playing a civ that had previously been China, and it had one last bit, like literally in my entire empire, one last section of Great Wall from that era, and I bulldozed over it to build a department store because my people needed happiness.
I think that's ludonarrative harmony.
Yeah, like it was
Resonance.
really fucking funny, and I was like, oh god, yeah, this does make a lot of sense.
It's a story.
So the ages are kind of a form of resetting, where like there are benefits you take forward by doing well in each individual age, but there's also there's nothing from stopping you. Say you pick a science focused civ in the first age in the antiquity era and you go, I didn't actually do all that well, but I have a lot of production, let's say. So what if I play a militaristic civ in the exploration era?
So here's the other thing, is though you choose the leader that stays with you throughout the entire game, the civilizations you pick can change between era. Yes. And this means that there are early civilizations that don't exist in the later ages. It's interesting because you have a limited amount of the total ones to choose from when you go from one age to the next. And those are based on oftentimes what leader you chose, what civ you chose in the first age, and there's a few side unlocks, like you can unlock, I think, the Shawnee for having two suzerains.
Yeah.
You can unlock the Ming Dynasty for improving jade resources.
You can unlock the Normans by having like 3 walls. You can unlock the Chola by having like 3 cities on coasts.
Yeah. Essentially, they are trying to still make it so that the civilization you choose has some amount of historic or geographic basis for what you have played. Each civilization has like 2 things they're supposed to be good at. I say supposed to be because we'll get into that later, probably. But in general, it's like, you know, a city will be expansionist, diplomatic, cultural, scientific, militaristic, or economical, or something like that.
Yeah.
And those also relate to another mechanic that has 6 iterations, by the way, which we'll explain in a second.
Yeah.
So you switch civs as you go. They try to keep them relatively similar.
Yeah. One thing that they do is like they try to civs that kind of naturally flow into another civ tend to be somewhat similar. So, like, in my head, for example, the Mississippi is somebody that you can take in antiquity. They become the Inca, I believe, which,
I think they give you Shawnee.
Yeah, no, they're the ones who give you Shawnee. I don't remember who gives you Inca, but putting that out of my mind for a minute.
Maya.
Yeah, that's it. Like, the Maya give you the Inca, the Mississippi give you the Shawnee. Like, you can kind of see the idea of like North American Civ gives you North American Civ.
And then like Inca gives you Mexico and Shawnee gives you America, which...
Yeah. So, okay.
Again, we have to look past it sometimes.
I think we're going to get into it a little bit sooner than you might think, though. So okay. We're a little bit into the episode. I want to make my definitive statement about Civ 7 right now. Civilization 7 is a wonderful game that adds a lot of unique ideas to the 4X genre. I look forward to how it is continually developed. I think that Firaxis knocked it out of the park in many ways. I would also never tell anybody to purchase it right now.
I think it'll be a pretty good game.
Yeah, I like
It will be being the keyword there.
it's so, I wanna compliment Sandwich It essentially of like, it is a wonderful game, but right this second, it is not a game that is worth $70, let alone $130.
Yeah.
Like, I would never recommend this game to somebody, even if they really, really, really liked Civ 6 and want the newest one. I have actively told friends of mine who really love Civ 6, don't buy this yet.
Yeah, I think it has a lot of cool mechanics, it has a lot of good ideas, but it is mired in a lot of issues that add up, and I believe that those can be fixed with time and with, staff, I guess.
Yeah.
But, like, it feels like it was shipped in a rush because they had a deadline to meet. And I mean, yes, there's so many of that, but we haven't even finished talking about all the mechanics. we can't blow our load so early.
I'm sorry.
Like, okay, I mentioned the 6 traits that civs can have. That's because they have attribute points, which are other smaller tech trees that aren't the technology tree or the civic tree. And completing legacy paths and doing other narrative missions or things like having a number of trade routes or getting a number of suzerains or capturing cities, different little achievements will give you attribute points.
Doing behaviors specific to that style of gameplay will usually give you a behavior point. Like, found 4 cities and you get an expansionist point.
Yeah.
Build a couple of wonders. That's the...
Yeah, building a couple of wonders.
Yeah, building
gives you culture.
a couple of wonders gives you culture. That also works, I suppose.
And there are 6 of these. Again, it's militaristic, diplomatic, expansionist, economic, scientific, and cultural. And you can also get points for them through mementos, which again are like small perks you choose when starting the game in between every age. But these are pretty good bonuses that not only stay between eras, but they also scale with era. It'll be like +1 science per age on science buildings.
Yeah.
So it's pretty handy to have them.
Yeah, that's a recurring thing that I really like, is that a lot of the ways that they make something continually upgraded, essentially, is by having it give you +X per age. So, +1 per age on specialists.
Yeah.
+1 per age on, +2 per age on the capital, that sort of thing.
It is a clever way to scale up something, and also it'll get into something that I'm sure we'll mention when we talk more about the nitty gritty of the baddie waddy.
Yeah.
I also wanted to mention, okay, this is one of the things that we got so right. Towns. So in our Civ 6 episode, we mentioned it would be cool to have a small city that isn't quite a city but could be upgraded to a city. They did it. I mean, you still grow towns and expand them, but the idea is that towns don't produce anything. Their production is turned into gold. They grow with food and they get a bonus to food growth, but you can also replace that with a specialization which ships their food to nearby cities, and then gives you some other benefit while it's still a town.
Yeah.
And then you can pay money to flip that into a city that starts producing things but doesn't ship out its production in food and doesn't have a specialization.
Yeah. I love the prospect of founding a new town, because the sheer fact that like a town is just an immediate boost to gold per turn in some way, shape, or form, like, especially as somebody who, my personal favorite way to play is economic. I've always liked being gold focused civs a lot, and I'm very happy that economics has its own victory condition. I love the process of like seeing a decent spot and being like, I can get a town right there. Like, that adds something to me for the expansion element of like, I don't have to sit and babysit this, but I do have to chase somebody out if I want this spot.
I like it because there's so many times in Civ 6 where I would try to settle somewhere, not because it's a great spot for a city, but because it has like one luxury that I want or something.
Yeah.
Or like it's coastal and I have nowhere to put coastal wonders. And it's like, I don't need this to be big. I need it to be small Shitsville that has one purpose, but like, I don't want to make all these choices for it like a normal city.
Yeah.
And now you can do that. You can have a thing that you don't have to make choices for as much. You still have to grow it and stuff. Which reminds me, city growth and town growth in turn is different in an interesting way.
This is one of the changes that I think is more controversial, but that I fucking love.
So in Civ 6, the way it worked is you would grow your city to a new hex, though it would grow, I think, automatically.
Yeah,
You
usually...
you could buy new hexes, but usually it's like, here's one we think you'll like.
Yeah. Civ 5 and Civ 6 primarily were like, there were ways to expand your border, and there were ways to, like, grow the rate at which you expand your border, but by and large, it was a passive thing.
Yeah, and then gaining population gave you workers that you could put on a tile to get the resources from the tile.
Yeah. It has essentially been kind of truncated.
Yeah.
Whereby now you grow your population still, but when you get a new population, instead of, like, growing to a tile and then slotting in workers, the population itself is just a tile that you place that either, essentially, there's a couple of different things that they can become. Not going to get into the nitty-gritty just yet, but if you place it on a resource, it will give you, like, the appropriate resource, so, you know, a plantation, a mine, what have you. If you place it on just general ground, you'll usually get, like, a rural tile.
A farm.
A farm of some variety, a farm, a workshop, a sawmill.
Yeah.
Well, that's a different
You put
thing.
it on water, it'll be a fishing boat.
Yep.
All of these are rural tiles.
Yeah.
The distinction is that once you build a building from your city on a tile,
It becomes urban.
it becomes urban. Urban tiles can have 2 buildings on them, and once it has both buildings, it is considered a quarter. Some civilizations have unique quarters that are completed when building unique buildings.
Yeah.
Be very careful not to build one of your unique buildings on an ageless building.
Yeah.
Ageless buildings are called that because you can build them regardless of what age you're in, or like if you didn't build them in the first age, you'll be able to still build them in the next, and they keep their production and resources between ages.
Yeah.
So if it's near the end of an age, I'll usually try to round out whatever ageless buildings I don't have.
Yeah.
Because if I'm trying to build, like, you know, a monument and it's almost the exploration age, it'll just stop building the monument when I move over.
Yeah.
But so in Civ 6, they had builders, which were units that you have to walk around, and they would create tile improvements, but you still had to put a worker on the tile.
Yeah.
The tile improvements essentially became these rural tiles.
Yes.
Growing your population is both improving a tile and putting a worker on it.
And growing your border as
Yeah.
well. Like, when you put a tile down, it will grow to whatever applicable, like, it will essentially expand one tile out. I can't wait for whatever leader they add that, like, just auto adds to. That's going to be a very fun leader for me to play.
Yeah.
Anyway.
This also brings me to another point that we got right, is they don't have, God, what is it, loyalty? They don't have loyalty.
Yeah, loyalty's gone.
So a big problem I had with Civ 6 is that they have a loyalty system where settlements have to be close to your capital, and the farther it is from the capital, the less loyal it will be. And if a settlement's too loyal, usually by being far from your capital and close to another civilization, the other civilization will gain control of it. Or they'll just become an independent NPC city that hates everyone.
Yeah.
And I always felt like that sucked because it limited how you could move around. I think it's a mechanic that makes sense maybe from a historical standpoint, though it made also actually colonizing distant lands a lot harder because you got like a flat negative 50% loyalty or something from off-continent settlements.
It feels like the kind of thing that was made for a specific problem in Civ 6.
Yeah.
And, like, I understand it, but it is the kind of thing that's probably best left to Civ 6, at least for now.
So, essentially, from what I understand, in Civ 5, it was a good strategy to aggressively settle close to your opponents, which is called forward settling by the community, to limit how far they could expand.
Yeah.
In a very sort of go way. And loyalty was supposed to remove that, but it ended up kind of making it hard to actively expand, which meant certain play patterns was really difficult, like going off continent to get other luxuries, which was a thing that kind of encouraged trade, but besides the point, they don't have loyalty. You can forward settle. I kind of like that because I tend to view Civ as a board game with programming involved.
Yeah.
I treat it more like a board game with like more abstracted mechanics that are based off of real world concepts, but not supposed to simulate them. Because a culture tree isn't really how culture works, for example, but as a game mechanic, it's cool. I think there is a problem Civ has that a lot of other games do, where there's too many different types of players, and somebody's going to be disappointed no matter what, even if 90% of the players like it, because there's so many different types of people playing.
One of the salient points I think that was made by a YouTuber named Rosenkreutz, who I'm going to refer to another time, is that, like, he essentially brought up the idea of, like, what is base game Civ? Because Religion is base game Civ 6. Religion was not base game Civ 5. And so the fact that, like, Religion in the previous games, like, from Civ 4 previously, was kind of what factions are in Civ 7, where, like, it was a somewhat useless mechanic that became useful because the comms either loved or hated you depending on if you shared or opposed a religion. And so, like, having it in a sort of half form in Civ 7, while that feels like the kind of thing that somebody who played Civ will come to Civ 7 and be like, hey, what the hell, I loved the religion aspect. It's also, like, the kind of thing that actually makes a lot of sense to, like, pare it back down to a specific thing. Because, like, yeah, it hasn't actually been base game in a lot of the other Civs. That's, I kind of think, why economic victory makes a lot of sense, is because gold per turn economics has been a massive, like, secondary mechanic in all of Civ's history.
Yeah.
And so, like, just making that another victory condition makes a lot of sense.
I want to note that even nowadays, so much of Civ's political philosophy is based around the Cold War. And I think that's most obvious with things like the man on the moon or the first man flight being the science condition. But also, I think a lot of concepts about what a victory condition can be is based around the Cold War in some regards. Maybe not necessarily the World Bank, though I do think something like the Euro is sort of a similar comparison. And religious victory is, I feel like more of a, like, medieval era type thing of, like, the Crusades and stuff like that.
One of the things that I, like, this is something I think about a lot with geopolitics nowadays, like, in a literal modern context, is that religion was so deeply important even 50 years ago. Religion as an institution is a significant amount less important nowadays than it has been for a long time. There are individual aspects, like,
it's complicated because we are seeing an uptick in evangelical run leaders. So, like, it's kind of hard to not say that.
It's hard to say that that isn't a religion, but at the same time, I look at that and go, that's a grift. That's not actually a religion. That is, you know, like...
It's complicated, I guess. I think, though, like, so if I remember correctly, cultural victories were added in Civ 5.
I want to say yes, at the very least in the form that we kind of have and think about them now.
And that is based off soft power, which is a bit more of a modern thing in terms of the grand scheme of things. The idea of culture being a sort of commerce that you can use to bargain with people. See also Moon Channel's video on kawaii and anime and soft power. I think that's the perfect introduction to the concept. we mentioned that on the Net Surfies even, because it's just so apt, and it works great here because it is essentially discussing a cultural victory.
Yeah.
Now, I do think, though, you have things in the Cold War of, like, Russian culture, and the Red Scare is as much about, like, communism is evil as it is Russian culture, and Soviet culture, I guess, in that case, is evil. When you think about, essentially, the historical representation in Civ, as well as the political philosophies and the way they're depicted, you can think of it as these are Americans who are big into the Cold War. Because, for example, this is a bit of a minor change. In Civ 6, you had policy cards. In Civ 7, you still have policy cards. They work a bit differently. You still unlock them via the civics tree, but you don't really have governments until the modern age where you have ideologies.
Yeah.
And the ideologies are fascism, democracy, and communism.
Yeah, it's the big three from
World War II, more or less.
Yeah.
Is that these are essentially Axis is fascism, America is democracy, and the Soviet Union is communism. And the way they're depicted is very pop culture understanding of that and the Cold War era. And that's not entirely accurate to the modern political field. It's not entirely accurate to political historians or theory. But it's based like that because they're big Cold War nerds and they're big World War II nerds. And, like, I think this is, again, going back a bit, a lot of people play video games for different reasons. And one of the most important aspects to being a critic you can do is to understand that like some people want to play historical simulators, but Civ also kind of isn't that. There are games that try to do that more. I think Paradox games tend to be recommended in
Paradox
that regard.
is definitely like grand strategy games.
But like the fact that those people exist means that Firaxis has to address that in some way or they will get complaints.
I want to spend just a little bit of time talking about the general politics of Civ 7 and civilization as a whole.
Okay.
Because
we're essentially doing that now. But...
Yeah, like that's why the conversation has, I don't know if you've known this, the conversation has sort of naturally flown to the point where I could in fact bring it up at this point.
It's like a bird, it's naturally flown.
So...
Except for penguins and ostriches, and a few other birds.
So, okay, Civilization 7. I want to focus on two criticisms here that you can levy at Civ 7, that, like, one that I agree with, one that I disagree with. The one that I actually disagree with is probably the more common complaint I have seen. The fact that leaders and civs are two different things leads to, let's just say, very problematic pairings. Ben Franklin of the Shawnee has been described to me as a new low for 4X games, for example. Now, I understand this criticism. I would even happily couch this and say, like, the real people to ask over whether or not that is cool is going to be the people themselves, of course. It is going to be the individual, it is up to the individual people who are impacted by something like this to determine whether or not it is cool. However, what I actually like about this is that it kind of, ludo-narratively, said that one the second time, the third time we summon ludo-narrative.
You just said it.
Oh no! I'm not...
Nope. He's sinking into the bog of eternal stench.
Oh, thank God. Okay, good. Yeah. I was really worried we were going to have to introduce a new character.
Yeah.
So, what I like about this is that it, ludo-narratively shows who is related to what civs and what civs are related to what other civs. What I mean by this is, if I pick Tecumseh, for example. Tecumseh, I think it's pronounced Tecumtha, actually, but based on what he says in game, I'm going to continue pronouncing it Tecumseh because I'm not 100% certain. He is the Shawnee leader, and as perhaps a little bit of marketing, let's say, Firaxis made a very fine point that they were talking to Shawnee leaders themselves and the tribe itself to get Tecumseh correct because they had a bit of a misstep with the Cree in Civ 6.
Yeah.
The short version is basically that Poundmaker of the Cree is kind of not actually the best representation. He's somebody who's sort of been co-opted a bit into he's the good Native American.
Sort of like Squanto.
Yeah. It's the idea of he's good because he was acquiescent to the American state, basically. And so they made a very specific point of, hey, we're talking to the people this time. But what I like about that is that when you pick Tecumseh, it shows that by picking him, you will unlock the Shawnee, you will unlock America, and you will unlock Mexico. What that tells me, as a video game player who knows literally nothing about history, I've just picked up Civilization 7 because I like the idea of a grand strategy game, but I know nothing about history. That immediately tells me who this one individual is directly related to, and kind of gets me thinking about how civs flow into other civs. This is something that I also like with the fact that civilizations actively unlock other civilizations by default, where obviously the three Chinese dynasties go into each other. That makes a lot of sense. But, the idea of Hawaii being its own exploration age civ, that's a very fun, interesting, I guess it's not a change. There was a Kamehameha in Civ 5. But it's a fun, interesting idea present, and by having Jose Rizal unlock him directly, that tells me, oh, this guy is directly related to Hawaii. I wonder how.
Yeah.
I understand the criticism. I would even agree in many aspects with the criticism of it is fundamentally weird and a little problematic to be it's Machiavelli of the fascist Mughal Empire.
Yeah. I kind of have a mixed feeling about this because at the same time, I think games like this tend to lean into the absurdism involved in it. That we can recognize that it is distasteful to an extent to have somebody like Ben Franklin leading, Mississippi Native Americans, but at the same time, it's sort of a dark humor sort of thing. I know I sound bad, but I feel like dark humor is... Okay, I don't want to sound like a right-wing pundit, like, oh, you can't make jokes about anything. But, like, I think a lot of times the game developers recognize that it would be bad taste, and they either abstract it further by things like, in this instance, Mississippi can conquer the invaders. They can kill them. They can survive to the future. But also, like, it doesn't really address that because that opens a much deeper discussion than what Civ is about. And instead, they try to use the, like, almost cartoony representation of characters and historical figures to add, like, irony. This is not how it played out in real life. Isn't that funny? Whether or not that itself is a good joke or not is, I think, complicated, but it is a way to diffuse tension from that. And I feel like other games tend to use this sort of weird, dissonant, distasteful clashing into a dark humor form.
I want to say that I don't know if Humankind was necessarily funny with it, but I do know that Humankind played around with this idea as well of, like, you pick one leader and then sort of, like, wear different civilizations throughout history, but it's kind of, there's an inherent humor in seeing Nikola Tesla wearing a Greek toga.
I think, so a great example is Gandhi.
Yeah.
Gandhi has always been I don't want to say always been a joke, but he's had this role in civilization that is completely contrary to who he was in real life and what he stood for. That can be viewed as disrespectful, and I certainly understand if people feel that way. But at the same time, it is, I think, very funny to imagine Gandhi as a nuclear warlord. Who will rampantly destroy the earth because you angered him at chess. And, like, that has been a part of Civ since literally the first game, and I think that defense or that sort of framework has persisted. It is hard to do historical fiction without portraying tragedies because there's a lot of tragedies in history. There's a lot of good stuff too, but again, it's also a game where you fight people. And fighting is tragic.
It's a game where you lead...
Wait, hold on, sorry. I can't say that. I'm gonna get sued by Hasbro.
I understand the criticism of it, but at the same time, 4X games inherently have to grapple with colonialism, imperialism, like the poor treatment of indigenous people. Like, these are kind of all things that come with the territory, and in my view, the abstracting a little bit of having people, like, essentially focusing on just sort of famous people rather than necessarily famous leaders is a much more positive thing for, like, how to add in more history, how to get more civs.
Okay.
It's not like they were just waiting for Machiavelli to put in the Italian civ or anything, but It opens the doors more than I think it sort of closes them or misrepresents people.
So essentially they are trying to add more variety in the source of leaders. So, like, while there were variety, like Gandhi being a religious leader, but he's treated as just the leader of a state, and states do war, they're trying to really actively implement a wider variety of people throughout history who were leaders in fields not necessarily related to government or military. One of the big ones that got controversy from idiots and racists was Harriet Tubman, who's a very cool inclusion. Technically still military because she was a spy for the Union.
She is a military focused in that she has an espionage focus, which I think is very fun.
Which I honestly never learned in school about her being a spy until Civilization added that.
I only knew about the Underground Railroad, of course. I never knew that she was also a spy in the Civil War. That's awesome. I think that they did a really smart thing by adding both Harriet Tubman and Ben Franklin.
Oh, because they added a white guy to placate the masses.
Yes, of course.
Franklin's not even a founding father is the thing. There were people who were like, but Ben Franklin, that's a fine inclusion. He's just on $1.
Yeah.
He wrote a book.
Yeah, like, that's the thing in my mind that sort of, like, really cemented what they were going for, is, like, they understand that Harriet Tubman is going to be a controversial pick for less good reasons than there should. Like, for bad reasons. And so, by being like, and Ben Franklin, it sets an immediate precedent, especially as an American studio, of, like, we are not focusing, at least exclusively, on leaders. We are focusing on important people. Machiavelli.
They did not include an immediate president.
Yeah.
Which,
yeah.
honestly, fuck George Washington.
Fuck George Washington.
What did you do? Go on a boat?
Bring back Teddy Roosevelt, and don't even make it when he was make it Bull Moose Party Teddy Roosevelt. Wait, they've already done this.
Yeah. I do want to say, like, so they just added Ada Lovelace to the game.
Yeah.
Great inclusion. Ada Lovelace, very important figure, both in terms of feminism and also, like, she wasn't outright feminist, but she was super influential in the creation of computers and sort of technology as a whole. So much of what we take for granted nowadays would not have been possible without her, and I think it's really cool to include her.
Yeah.
Because she is often overlooked in terms of the history of technology. Literally, woman in STEM has always been STEM.
Yeah. Like, it's... I think that the opening up of leaders...
it would be wild if they had Alan Turing.
Yeah, the misogynist version.
Well, he was gay.
Yeah, he wasn't even misogynist, he was just gay.
I don't know if he was misogynist, but he was very gay.
Alan Turing, if you're listening and want to come on to talk about Adam Lovelace.
The Imitation Game.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's cool. I like it. I wish Ben Franklin had more to do with food.
Yeah.
Because again, he wrote a book for farmers.
Yeah, he famously wrote the almanac that farmers use.
Hey, you already know, this is post-production Matthew Marissa. That was quite a fun episode with a lot of takes, wasn't it? Well, we had to split an episode into 2 parts because we had too much to say about Civilization 7. That's 7 divided by 2. Isn't that 3.5? That's what I would rate this episode. Thanks for listening. You can find us on any podcasting platform you like. Give us a like, give us a rating, give us a review. Let us know how we're doing. Let us know what you want us to cover or things you think we might be interested in. You can find me at twack at bsky.social or twitch.tv/twack, where I've been streaming a lot of the game Blue Prince. Very good game. Obsessed with it. You can also find Galen at GALENWILS0N on various social media sites or on Twitch at twitch.tv/machinegunvampire. See ya!